All right, let's go ahead and start. People are still trickling in, and they can trickle in as they need to.
Um, just kind of let me know who's on the call, if you can. Art, can you kind of just call roll a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 17 people in total. Starting alphabetically, myself, Bill Goodrich, Brad Alston, Brett Hess, Brett Johnson, Dan Thurkel, Dan Roble, Dave Cleveland, John Gonthier, K.L. Russell, uh, Mindy, which I think is Chris Roberts, Paul Schneider, Rex. We have Zeke Durica. Welcome, Zeke. Kind of late for you, but glad you came. And I think that's it.
That's cool.
How about me?
Oh, and Stan McGrew.
And Stan.
And Stan McGrew. Yep.
So we have a kind of a varied group. Maybe one or two of you have not been flying in the wave at Morgan before, but there is a pretty good contingent of people who know as much about wave flying as I do. But so if anybody has anything to offer, please feel free to interrupt. I think that the call generally works better if you keep your audio on mute, but feel totally free to break in and interrupt, ask a question or make an observation or catch me lying or something like that.
Lynn, let me just remind people that this is also being recorded and will be posted to our website. So don't say something that you might regret.
I already have. So.
Go,
and I know Paul did. You were recording that, right?
Yeah. No, I wasn't, but I should have been.
Okay.
Go ahead and start, Lynn. This is great.
So we're going to start off with a little bit of theory about wave. And I think the most important concept to understanding wave, and more broadly to understanding soaring weather in general, is the concept of atmospheric stability. And so we'll start with just a quick little review of that concept. It has to do with lapse rates, and there's a couple of key lapse rates that I want to remind you of. There is the dry adiabatic lapse rate, which is a constant of nature, and the dry adiabatic lapse rate is the rate at which lifted air will cool as it rises and decompresses. It also is the rate at which it will heat as it descends and compresses. It happens the same way every time it happens. It, as I say, is a constant of nature. There's also the ambient lapse rate, and the ambient lapse rate is, whatever it is that day. It can be different from day to day. It is different from day to day, and it varies from one atmospheric level to another. There are some kind of rules of thumb about how much change you expect when you change from one elevation to another, but those rules of thumb are just that. The actual conditions can be totally different. So the actual ambient lapse rate can differ very much from whatever predictive model that there might be, and normally not what the dry adiabatic lapse rate might predict if you were thinking about that. The dry adiabatic lapse rate does apply, though, if air is lifted from one elevation to another. That air mass will cool at exactly the dry adiabatic lapse rate. So if the ambient lapse rate exactly equals the dry adiabatic, which I say in parentheses, it never happens. It might happen once briefly, but it doesn't really happen that often. Then what that means is that lifted air will be the same temperature as the surrounding air. So get your head around that idea a little bit if it's new to you.
Lynn, we're not seeing your slides change.
Oh, you're not seeing my slides change. So you're not seeing this happen?
So you have to go to your presentation screen, switch your screens if you're on a dual screen presentation.
I am on single screen and I am on presentation. Let me see if I can figure that out. So what screen are you seeing?
Your desktop.
Oh, the desktop, okay.
With PowerPoint and your raw slides on them, not the presentation.
Okay, you're seeing the desktop with power slides. Okay, I think I'm going to stick on that screen. When I go into presentation mode, what it looks like happens is that it doesn't follow me. So if I do this, and I think the same thing was happening to Tim, right?
I think so. Keeping it on this window is perfectly fine. We can see it just fine.
So if right now I'm on my presentation screen on mine, but you don't see me moving the slides around, huh?
No, we don't.
Okay, yeah, this very same thing was happening to Tim the other day. So
yeah, this view is fine.
So that looks okay?
Yep, looks fine. I think we can read it just fine.
Okay, so if the ambient lapse rate exactly equals the dry adiabatic, then the lifted air will be the same temperature as the surrounding air. And due to the laws of buoyancy, it'll just stay put where it is. And under those conditions, the atmosphere is said to be neutrally stable. And so if the ambient lapse rate is less than the dry adiabatic, lifted air will be cooler than the surrounding. So that means that it's colder going up, then the air will cool as it is lifted. And so when it gets there, the other way around, the air is less cool in the surrounding than the air that's lifted. And so if that happens, then the lifted air is cooler than the surrounding, and it falls back down. And it's important to note that the same exact thing happens to sinking air. If I take a parcel of air that is up high, and the apse rate and the ambient lapse rate is less than the dry adiabatic, then when I drag that air down, it will heat more rapidly than the surrounding air would be. So it'll be warmer than the surroundings, and it will rise back up. It's like there's rubber bands on all the air, and under those conditions, the atmosphere is to be stable. Another word for that same thing is inverted. You may have heard the use of the word inversion used in the more narrow sense, where people say it's actually warmer up high than it is down low. Technically, an inversion is simply that it's not necessarily warmer up high, but it's warmer than lifted air would be up high. And so under those circumstances, the atmosphere doesn't want to move. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move on. So stable air causes wind to flow in layers with no mixing. And this is really critical to understanding what's going on the wave. So when the atmosphere is stable, each parcel of air has a buoyant level that it wants to be at. It doesn't want to go up or down. And so as advection comes from the side, that means wind blowing from the side, the flow will be in layers with no mixing up and down. So was that? Let me just take a second and just ask, is that idea clear to everybody? So the other things that stable air causes is it causes layered stratus clouds. And I will put a little parenthesis by that, or an asterisk. A lenticular is a type of cumulus cloud, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. Stable air also causes steady precipitation if there's enough moisture, and it causes lack of thermal lift, and it causes waves if there is enough wind. Unstable air, by contrast, causes vertical mixing. As a matter of fact, that's one of the definitions of unstable air. If air is going up or down vertically, it'll mix, and that's one of the hallmarks or the markers of unstable air. It causes cumulus clouds, puffy cumulus clouds. It'll cause showery precipitation and thermal lift if there is unstable air. So let's look at how stable air results in wave genesis. So waves form downstream of a barrier when the wind encounters a barrier such as a mountain ridge. And waves form when three things happen. There's moderate or strong winds at the ridge top level. The winds are about perpendicular to the ridge, and there's the correct thermal profile. Wave formation is only possible when there is a stable layer of air above the ridge top, resulting in this layered flow that I've been describing. If there is unstable air above the ridge top, then the wave will break up in the vertical mixing that will occur. Wave formation is optimal when there's an unstable layer below and an inverted highly stable layer just above the ridge. Now that requirement isn't an absolute must, but it is very helpful if there's an unstable layer below the ridge top and an inverted highly stable layer just above the ridge. There must be a stable layer above the ridge top. It's optimal if that layer above the ridge top is highly stable and the layer below the ridge top is unstable. In unstable conditions, as I mentioned, there's vertical motion. And if something starts going down, it'll accelerate down. If something starts going up, it'll accelerate up. I think I'm going to take just a moment here and switch over to my whiteboard. I'm going to make an attempt to do that. So let's see. Okay, I think I figured out how to do this. All right, so you should see a whiteboard with a little bump on it. Are you guys, can someone confirm that you're seeing that?
Yep, we see it. Thank you.
Okay. So what that is that's my very artistic rendition of a mountain, and the wind is going to be coming from this direction here. You saw that little arrow that I just drew. So what's going on is the wind comes up and it hits the mountain and is deflected up. It really doesn't want to go up very much. It might accelerate for the lower portion of it here. But as it gets up to the top of the mountain, it's running into that inversion, doesn't really want to go up very much more. And it gets shoved over the crest of the mountain. And this is sort of like half of a Venturi tube here. Because what's going on the other side is that there's a lot of air that's happening, that's kind of doing the same thing. The next layer up is kind of doing the same thing, and it gets up to this point right here, right? And so what's going on the backside is that the air accelerates and rushes down. And as it goes down, it's really accelerating down the backside of the mountain, and it gets down to the backside of the mountain. And remember, the buoyancy level of that air was higher, and so it'll go through a series of up-downs, oscillating around the buoyant level. Now, it's really important to understand what's going on here on the backside of the mountain. And I'll try to illustrate that in a little more detail. So this next layer has the same thing. It really doesn't want to go up into this stable area, but on the backside it rushes down, and then it oscillates in the same way.
Lynn, does it rush down or does it drop because the layer of air below it has fallen?
The answer to that question is both. Certainly the air in this area right here that is directly interacting with the mountain is disturbed off of its buoyant level, and it really wants to get down. And as it goes down, it's dropping into an unstable layer below the ridge top and accelerating down. And the kind of important, the next step, and I'm really kind of presuming a little bit in advance about the intent of your question, but the thing is that this area of downward rushing wind, downward rushing air, just by Bernoulli, is a very low pressure. It's going down, and it's going down fast. And because of those two things, there's a big pressure drop in this zone on the backside of the mountain. And that pressure drop really cuts the legs out from underneath the upper atmosphere and sends a response up in this direction into the upper atmosphere. There's very little response into the upper atmosphere from the ridge itself directly above it. There's just really not much response here. And as you'll see, these higher levels go, the layers above the ridge look sort of like this. They go along with a very modest response upward to the ridge itself, but they go down in a hurry together with all these layers, and then they begin to oscillate. The next layers up here don't see the mountain at all, but they sure do see this low pressure zone and begin to oscillate. And way up high into the upper atmosphere, you'll get a response like this. Curiously, the wave depends more on its formation of that drop than it does in any increase. There's really not much of anything that happens above the ridgetop, as I mentioned, in an upward response, but there's a big drop, and then there's an oscillation around the previous buoyant level that the wave happens. I've drawn this a little bit wrong because the way I've drawn it here is that this oscillation is lower than this level. That's actually not right. It would be oscillating above, right on its original buoyant level, up and down on its original buoyant level. If I could try to draw that in this one, there's a big down, and then it'd be up like this.
So, Lynn, a question for you then. The primary wave would be where, and then the secondary or third, what would be looking at? I know
I've drawn just two cycles. This is the primary, and this is the secondary back here.
Thank you very much, because I know in Waldsburg we usually get the wave, and that's probably the primary, and then over the Heber Ridge behind that is the secondary that we're experiencing.
Right, and there's secondaries, and sometimes there's tertiaries or quaternaries, and
right.
There can be multiple cycles. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. So here's kind of one of the most important points, is that unlike in a thermal, there's no air molecules that go from near the surface to way up high. So in a thermal, you might have some air molecules that, started on the surface where the thermal started and go all the way up to 18 or 20 or 22,000 feet or some number like that. The amplitude of these oscillations that I'm describing is on the order of a few hundred feet. So these layers only go up and down maybe 200 or 300 feet down and 200 or 300 feet up. That's all they do. And so you might say to yourself, well, if they go just 200 feet up, how on earth can we soar them to very high altitudes? Because you might think of yourself in a glider sort of at this point here and climbing this wave to here and not being able to climb any higher because that's as high as that air goes. If you see that illustration there, right? But if I start at this point here and climb up, my whiteboard's just a little bit behind my voice, but you'll see what I'm talking about. If I start at this point here and climb up, I can go from here up to this next layer to the windward side. And then from there, I can climb up to here. And from there, I could go to the windward, climb up to here. You get the idea?
Well, it implies you're zigzagging, but actually you're not, Lynn. You're climbing in a shaft ahead of that first wave, inclined towards the ridge, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Let me explain that. But first of all, if you get that idea that I could just move to the windward side and move to the next layer and go up, the whole notion that there are layers is completely an imaginary one. You see, I've just drawn them at some certain density. If I drew them at a different density here, like this, then my zigzags would be tinier. Do you see that? My zigzags would be a lot littler. And if I just take that whole thing to the limit, I don't need to zigzag at all. What I need to do is just point to the windward enough that I don't drift backward across to the wave crest. I just point to the windward, and if I can illustrate this, as I go up, I'm continually hitting the next layer coming up. And I don't actually move to the windward, I'm just pointing to the windward. And the next layer coming up hits me. So when you're actually flying the wave, you are crabbed into the wind. And as you do that, the next layer coming up is continually hitting the glider as it goes. You're crabbed into the wind, and so you're moving relative to the air mass, but you're not moving relative to the ground. And the next layer coming up is hitting you. You can imagine that you're doing this little zigzaggy thing. But that zigzaggy thing is purely an artifact of how I've drawn the layers. So if I draw them closer together, the zigzags are littler, and if I draw them closer together, the zigzags are littler still. And if I just take that whole thing right to the limit, I'm just crabbed into the wind and going up the whole time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if you move your climb line over to the left a bit, Lynn, I think it'll be more obvious on the slope that you're always climbing into rising air.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Always climbing into rising air.
And well out in front of the bump you have here, well to the left of where you're showing.
Yeah, you can climb right to the crest. If you go a little bit to the lee side of the crest, then it's trouble. But you can climb right to the crest. But this area is really, to your point, the area that you're climbing in. Continually hitting the next layer up. Your crab makes you continually encounter the next layer up as you go. Does that make sense to everybody?
I still suggest, Lynn, move the line over almost to the dip. And even in that area, you're always in rising air. You don't have to go to the crest because...
That's absolutely true. Anything in this area climbs.
Yep.
And if you want to, and directly to your point, if you're looking for the fastest gradient of climb, it is probably to the windward side of the crest. The slope of these lines is better than the slope of these lines.
Lynn, then will there be, I've experienced many, many times when I get up into the wave, there are cumulus clouds forming, and all of a sudden I'm above those clouds.
Absolutely.
I don't know if they're wave clouds or they're more cumulus type clouds that I've been above in the wave, and then I'm above cloud base.
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move through the presentation. While we're on that topic of clouds a little bit, there's air rising here in this zone, and that air is being carried from warmer moisture levels up to the top of the mountain. If there's adequate moisture in the air, they'll form a cap cloud on top of the mountain there. And then the air dries out as it goes back down, and there'll be a gap in this area here where there's not any clouds. And then moving back up again, clouds will form again. And this is a lenticular in this area. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And there's a cap cloud in this area and a gap in between the cap clouds and the lenticulars. And technically, a lenticular is a kind of cumulus cloud because it's formed by this rising action of the air here. It has a very peculiar smooth look to it. If you see actual puffy cumulus together with waves, it is a rare occurrence. I've seen it before, but there's sometimes atmospheric conditions that will happen with puffy top cumulus very close to lenticulars. It's just not that often. But you'll see it occasionally where there's puffy top cumulus in the vicinity. But normally you'll see these smooth lenticulars over here, these smoother, well, these are really smooth. These are a little bit less smooth cap clouds over here and a gap in between. Okay, so I think if I can figure out how to do this, I'll switch back to my okay, now going back to my canned presentation here.
Robert's the only guy in the wave.
Yeah, hey Lynn,
Yeah.
you said there aren't layers, but I have some photographs of stacked lenticulars.
Oh,
Right.
sure. So stacked lenticulars can form in any layer. What I'm saying about that there aren't layers is that where I drew the lines is completely arbitrary. You can imagine them as being every 100 feet or every 1,000 feet or every 2 inches or whatever. There's not actual grain to the air. It's continuous. And the stack lenties form as a result of where there's layers of moisture that happen to be in the air. And so if there's moisture layers and less moist layers, then the stack lenties will form. But my point about where I drew the lines is just where I drew the lines. You know, it's completely arbitrary.
Thanks.
Let's see if I can find. Good night. So I'm trying to attempt to share, and my presentation's gone off my list of things that I can share. Let me work with that a little bit and see if I can figure out what's going on. Okay. So I say present. Okay, can you see my whole screen now?
No, I'm just seeing us.
Not yet, Lynn, but last time you did it, Lynn Alley was there, and then Lynn Alley presentation showed up underneath.
Okay.
So there is no Lynn Alley presentation at the moment.
Paul, you got any other jokes?
Now you pissed them off.
Yeah.
Mary's back.
What do you call a Frenchman in sandals?
What
Philippe
do you call a Frenchman in sandals?
Philippe Philip.
Gosh.
Missed your calling, Paul.
Well, it's really weird because my PowerPoint is no longer in my list of things that I can share.
Maybe try closing PowerPoint and opening PowerPoint up again, and then try to
Yeah,
reshare
let
it.
me try that.
Yeah.
Lynn, do you want to use my PowerPoint last week?
And then in the inane observer's perspective, there's a present now button on the bottom right of the screen.
Yes, I'm hitting present now, and I say present a window, and I see every window on my computer except for PowerPoint.
Naturally.
Why not?
Yeah. So, pardon me here while I struggle through for just a moment and get my presentation open back again. Restarting PowerPoint. There it is. Going back there, I say present now. Present a window. And there it is. It's back. Hooray. So you guys seeing that now?
Yeah, we
Yes,
got
we do.
that.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So where we were is right here. Okay. So this is a reference from a textbook about wave flight, where they were doing some computer modeling of waves using some kind of standardized ridge shapes. This is a ridge down in this area. Can you see me moving my mouse?
Yes.
The book didn't actually model what goes on at the lower levels, but you see this higher atmospheric response that we talked about before. And this case is called a trapped wave situation, which is the one that we really want to fly. And this example has a primary here, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and so forth. And these colors represent wind speeds. And you can see that going down the backside of the mountain, we do indeed develop some pretty rapid winds. And then buoyancy makes things recover. There's some instability down here, and you might get some almost vertical motion down here. And the rotors form underneath these nodes. And the nodes that you want to climb in, as Stan mentioned, they're here, not necessarily near the peak, but they're here where you get the most rapid climb rates, where the most vertical motion occurs. These little black nodes back here are areas where backward flow is forming. The scale is in meters per second, and so 20 meters per second is like 40-ish knots. And so this is, I don't know, in the 30s going down the backside of the mountain, where the upper level winds here were in the teens and 20s. You know, you get 30s going down the backside of the mountain, and you actually get backward flow in these little zones down there on the surface. So this is a typical case, a typical idealized case of trapped waves. And that's the kind we want to fly. Now, there's a thing called a hydrostatic jump wave, and I've heard a lot of guys talk about hydrostatic jump waves as if they're a good thing, and I don't think they are. I really don't think they are. A hydrostatic jump wave is to thermal soaring. Well, a hydrostatic jump wave is to a trapped wave as a thunderstorm is to a cumulus cloud and thermals. It's too much of a good thing. It's when the wave kind of gets out of control. And the thing that marks the wave getting out of control is vertical flow. So you see back in the trapped wave case how we almost got some vertical flow, but not quite. Right here, we almost got some vertical flow, but not quite. We got really steep, but not quite vertical flow. If the conditions that make the wave are so strong that you actually get vertical flow, then in that vertical flow, that's the definition of instability, and the air will mix around. Let me move to this other picture. So here we are, and you see how we got really, really rapid downward flow coming down the backside. This might be kind of like these wind events that happen on the Wasatch Front, like in Davis County when there's easterly gradients. You know, it'd be on the opposite from this picture, kind of, depending on your point of view. But you get really, really strong backwards flow. So these are in the 40s and 50 mile an hour kind of downward flow. And branches that will break off and go straight up. Now, what's wrong with that is that you see these individual layers breaking off and going up. When they get into here and they're going straight up, they just mix together. And that mixing destroys any information about what layer was which, and there's no more buoyant response, and they just go downstream. So in the trap wave example, every layer remained intact. it remained distinct and unmixed from the layer below it. Where in the hydrostatic jump wave example, as soon as there's vertical flow, they just mix and there's no more trapped waves downwind. So downwind of a hydrostatic jump wave, there is no secondary or tertiary, it's just mixed and it's... Now right here, there is some incredible lift. There is nutso, gonzo lift. You don't want to be in it. I have been in it, and it is just chaotic. It is, you know, it's the kind of stuff that you are struggling for control of the aircraft when you're in this area. You might be going up 2,000 feet a minute, and then a minute later you're going down 1,000 feet a minute, or 20 seconds later. And, you know, you're hitting your canopy and all sorts of bad stuff's happening here. And there's two kind of branches. There's this branch that goes up here. There's this branch that goes here on this backside of it and then curls back around. And in this area, it is complete and total nutso chaos. And Stan's towed me to areas like that, haven't you, Stan?
Occasionally, Lynn, and I marvel that I never ever got to shake you off. You always forgot. And I still marvel at that.
Yeah, I might tell a story about that.
That was Wayne, though, the story.
The story was Wayne, it wasn't you.
Yeah, that's right.
And he didn't shake me off either.
We've been there, though.
We've been there, yeah. Okay, the next slide is about wave taxonomy, the parts that you might see of the wave that you want to know some names of. And so first thing is that rotor turbulence can form on the surface, all the way from the surface to the top of the unstable layer. So as long as there's instability, you know, you'll find rotor turbulence all the way up to the top of the unstable layer. And down here on this backside, you remember these back rushes that were going on that are going this way, and the rotor turbulence will form underneath the wave crests, generally in this direction, which is clockwise in my example. So you'll see these rotors form up here. You'll see smaller rotors form going the opposite direction in the troughs, you know, up above here. And then if there's a breaking wave, it'll be going in this direction, this direction here. I think you can sort of see that from this picture. It comes up and is curling around in this way, like that. But the rotors, when you're in them, you don't really perceive any direction to them. You just perceive that you're in chaos. You're getting knocked around a lot. So rotors are one of the markers of waves, and they'll form underneath the crests of the trap waves and in the zone of the breaking waves, and they'll sometimes go on the surface. If you're flying along in this direction, you'll perceive alternate zones of tailwind, headwind, tailwind, headwind, tailwind, headwind as you fly towards the peak. If you fly up here above the level of the peak, you would probably see a similar thing with some headwind, tailwind, headwind, tailwind, and some alternate chop, smooth, chop, smooth, chop, smooth. You'll also see down, up, in this case, down, then up, then down, then up, then down, then up. And by the way, if you're flying a power airplane toward a ridge in conditions that might generate waves, there's some safety issues associated with that. You really would like to be above the ridgetop level substantially if you can possibly do that, or moving toward an area like a canyon where there is some clearance from the terrain, because you don't want to be in this zone here where the strong downdrafts are occurring. You want to be well above that as you're flying your airplane toward it. And you might notice, oh, hey, I'm seeing this rhythmic up, down, kind of climb, descent as I fly towards the ridge. And of course, any good glider pilot would turn perpendicular to the ridge in one of those up zones and get a little free altitude. Okay, the next thing is lenticular clouds. Lenticular clouds form when there's sufficient moisture to make the lenticular clouds, and they'll form at the levels where that moisture exists, and that could be arbitrary. There could be moisture in various different levels that comes from upstream, and you'll get this stacked lenticular thing. Just because the lannies are formed like this, that doesn't mean that the wave isn't completely continuous. The wave could be completely continuous all up along the windward side of this action. It can be just totally continuous. It doesn't mean that there's wave here and here and here and not in between these layers. The wave can be totally continuous. It's just where the moisture happens to be that makes that occur. Of course, just like blue thermals, wave can form in the absence of lenticulars altogether. There's many days that are dry and the wave is going gangbusters and there's no lenticular marker for it. Pause there for a moment for questions or comments.
Lynn, are there any visual indicators for the hydrostatic jump wave?
Yeah, there's these things. So I don't have any good photographs, but it begs a different question. Are there visual indicators other than lenticulars for wave activity? And the answer is yes, is that quite often there's roll clouds beneath the lenticulars that are caused by the rotor. And so the upgoing side of the rotor, moisture will condense there and form a roll cloud. And the roll cloud, the real indicator of it, this lower layer in this picture might have some components of roll to it. You see more fluffiness to it and less of the rounded, almost polished look of the lenticular. You'll see that in a roll cloud. But the real tip-off on a roll cloud is that it's long and perpendicular to not perpendicular to the ridge, parallel to the ridge. So when you see it stationary and moving along and down the ridge, that's roll clouds. Sometimes they'll form in kind of little isolated things. They don't have a flat bottom and a puffy top. They're kind of like a little rounded on the bottom and the top kind of a cloud, and they mark the rotor. In a hydrostatic jump wave, you won't often see lenticulars. What you see is these roll clouds that could be fairly ferocious in their aspect. They might be pretty high and pretty extensive. You'll see roll clouds marking the hydrostatic jump type waves. Does anybody have their own description of what a roll cloud would be like? I feel like I haven't given it very good justice. Stan, how would you describe roll clouds?
Well, basically, I'd say first you don't see the entire rotor because you're seeing the air rise to the condensation point and every particle going very rapidly through the cloud. The cloud doesn't move, but every particle of condensed moisture goes through and down the backside and evaporates again.
Right.
But if it didn't evaporate, you could see the entire actual rotor. And I do have some pictures over Morgan from years ago, from time to time, where I've never seen an entire rotor, Lynn, from top to bottom, but I've seen it where at least you get about a half a hemisphere of very visible air going up on the ridge side and falling down and just cloud disappearing on the downwind side.
Right, and in this kind of rounded, like Stan described it, maybe a hemispherical shape to the roll cloud.
Yep.
Not a flat bottom, a lot of kind of irregularity to it.
Oh, my speaker's working. We get the roll clouds in Logan pretty well. You can see the entire roll, and you can actually see it turn. So you can actually see it rotating.
That's another good point, is that you can sometimes see the motion in the roll cloud.
When I see them, they're typically smaller than I ever would expect them to be. It's a very small event.
And that's probably why you see them, because they're small.
Quarter mile from front to back.
Yeah, that's all good points. Okay, the next thing I want to describe is the Fohn gap. The Fohn gap. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly in German.
It's
The name.
Fern gap. Come on, Paul. Fern. Like a fern.
Fohn gap. Is that it?
It's Fern.
Fohn.
Fern.
The name is a German word, and I think it's related to the geographical area where it was first really identified and described.
Frank Drews is on the call. He's German.
Yeah, I am on the call, and I was handling my microphone here. I'm sorry. So it's Föhn, so it's umlaut. And as Lynn correctly said, it's really a particular wind in the Alps. It's called Föhn wind. And that's basically the reason why it's labeled this way. Like, other winds like the Scirocco or whatever you want to call it. These
the Chinook or whatever.
Chinook, exactly, in the US. So all of these winds. So Föhn, that's what it's pronounced. But I think in the US you get away with any pronunciation. So don't worry.
Well, thank you for correcting us, Frank.
We ignorant Americans say Fohn gap, So you'll hear that pronunciation a lot. But here's a really classic look, both from the ground and in the air, of what the gap looks like. In this example, the wind is coming from the left in this picture, and this is a cap cloud, and then these are the lenticulars. The air is going up over the mountaintop, then down, then up again on the front side of these lenticulars, and the gap is in the middle. And it's really a key part of soaring wave safety to watch the gap and watch how the gap might be changing from time to time. And we'll talk more about that toward the end of the presentation. Okay, my next topic is wave prediction. Is there a question? Next topic is wave prediction. Here are the ideal wave conditions, and these are rare. So strong instability, meaning negative thermal indices below ridgetop level, ending abruptly and an inversion at the ridgetop level. And you may remember me describing earlier that it is a requirement that there be stability someplace above the ridgetop level for the wave to form. The instability below the ridgetop level helps accelerate that downward flow that chops the legs out from up underneath the upper atmosphere and allows the wave to form. So if there's instability below the ridgetop level, you get acceleration in that downward flow, which helps the wave to form. Ideally, winds perpendicular to the ridge with little change in wind direction with altitude. Now, the reason that you want no change or little change in wind direction with altitude is it tends to disorganize the laminar flow if it has to change direction as it goes up or down. So you want the ridge, ideally, the winds to remain more or less the same direction as you go up. Wind speed of 20 knots at ridgetop level is a great wave generator, and wind speed increasing with altitude with 18,000 foot winds, 50 knots or greater. These are, again, ideal wave conditions. And why increasing with altitude helps is if I go back to my trapped wave example, it helps to fold the wave over in these trapped waves, which tends to make these oscillations really stable. You don't get any of this tendency for vertical flow that would destroy the wave action. It tends to fold them over as they go up. Okay, so those are ideal wave conditions. Okay, soarable wave conditions form if one of or two of these parameters aren't perfect, depending on the others. So waves can form in high winds, for example, with very little low-level instability, little or no low-level instability if the winds are strong enough. Conversely, ridge top winds can be as low as I've soared in good wave at 13 knots on the top of the ridge if the direction's favorable. And now I'm talking about our shared Wasatch Ridge that runs, south toward Heber, past Morgan and north up toward Logan. When we're soaring our ridge, the direction can be as far south as 200 degrees or as far north as 330 degrees if the thermal profile and wind strengths are adequate. So, the ideal conditions that I just mentioned are not absolute necessities for finding and flying wave. They'll form if two of the three parameters are favorable and the other one's not, wave will still likely form. I've got a skew-T plot for a characteristic wave signature, and I'm not going to take time tonight to really describe in detail how a skew-T plot works, but I am going to just mention one or two things. In this example, the black line is approximately the ridgetop level. The 700 millibar line is close to the ridgetop level at the ridges that we fly on around the Heber, Morgan, Logan area. This red line is the temperature, and you see this little hook? Can you see it right there? The temperature was going up, and there's that little hook, and that little hook is roughly coincident with the black line, the top of the ridge. That little hook is an inversion. So it means the temperature is actually climbing right in that area, or at least not. This direction is the direction of the dry adiabatics. So it's not going in the direction of the dry adiabatics. It's warmer than that. There's that little inversion, that little hook right at the ridgetop level, combined with ridgetop winds in excess of 20 knots. In this example, they're 30 knots. So this is a dandy predictor of the wave. Let's just look at that. It's southwest a little bit. Ridgetop winds are above 20 knots. They keep getting stronger and stronger as they go up. So when we get to the 500 millibar level, they're up over 40 knots. I've got this little hook. There are all the three markers. Direction, pretty stable. Wind strength, the correct atmospheric profile. That's what a skew-T looks like for dandy wave. Now, I haven't updated this presentation. I probably should have, since what's the name of the new predictor? I've got a mental block right here.
SkySight.
SkySight. Thank you. SkySight has a wave prediction model in it, and I probably should have prepared a little bit about the SkySight wave prediction model. I can try pulling it up in just a moment and looking at it. There probably isn't good wave prediction today, but we can at least look at it.
You should look at the prediction for Friday.
Go ahead, say that again.
You should look at the prediction for Friday. Dave Cleveland pointed out some remarkable wave prediction on Friday.
Okay. We can pull it up. We can try to pull it up at the end of the presentation and see what it looks like.
That's actually in the Sierra Nevadas.
So SkySight in 2019 was so spooky good, I was thinking it was magic. In 2020, not so good. And what I mean not so good was that it still fairly reliably predicted wave. It did not reliably predict wave strength. It was often optimistic. In 2019, it seemed like it was pessimistic. In 2020, it seemed like it was optimistic.
How about
I went out on a lot of those days that were
accuracy of the location of the primary wave? Was that also degraded?
It was. Although I think generally speaking, it's predicting the same place almost every day. And that's the place I tow to. We can talk about that in a moment. But I'll try to return to that a little bit. But I think many of you are familiar with and have used the SkySight model. And my confidence still is pretty high in it. It's better than any other tool we've ever had. It did not have a perfect track record of predicting thermal strength. The other thing it did in 2020 is that it predicted strong wave many times in Cache Valley that just didn't happen. Just wasn't there.
That's just because we're so lucky up here.
Yeah. Well, as one or two guys that landed up in Cache Valley can attest. But okay, let's move on to wave safety. So I've cataloged the potential risks of wave flying. I'm not sure that this is complete, but visibility issues, rotor turbulence and shear layers, encountering an airliner full of people, high altitude issues. So let's kind of go through those one at a time. So I won't take time to tell the story here, but the closest I ever came to getting killed in a glider was in the Sierras in wave. And, you know, kind of what happened is that the phone gap closed up and left me without a clear way to escape. And it can be a very, very treacherous thing. So the basic idea is watch the gap carefully and watch for changes in the gap that the gap might be closing. And this specific slide is about bridged gaps. These bridges will happen downwind of a canyon or something like that where the wave isn't forming and just moist air is just being carried across without, you know, the rising and sinking the sinking and the rising that will dry it out. And so a bridge will form. These areas, there's not going to be wave lift around the area of the bridge. And you're way up on top and you think, holy cow, I can get across there just easily. Well, you need lots of clearance. And by lots of clearance, I'm talking about thousands of feet to safely cross one of these bridges downwind of a canyon. There might be some pretty good sinking air, you know, in the area. And the basic problem is that the wind strength will often be so strong that by the time you crab into it, your glide ratio is pretty low. And you think you can get across here and you just can't. So the other thing that happens quite often to less experienced wave pilots is that they'll drift back over the crest of the wave over the lenticular. And this was relating to Stan's comment earlier. You know, if I move clear back over here, a lenticular might be in this area and the pilot will drift up over the lenticular. And now we're up over the lenticular. We might even get on the back side of the crest a little bit. We go, holy cow, I'm starting to sink toward this cloud underneath me. I need to move upwind. Well, quite often, upwind means turning directly into a 50 knot plus wind. And it just takes a surprising amount of altitude to clear that. And you just sink helplessly down into the lenticular. And that's not something that you want to be doing for lack of visibility. So, you know, the doggone truth is, don't do it. Don't fly up over the top of the lenticular. Any move that you have to make upwind just suck altitude in sometimes a surprising way. And if you have to cross these bridges, you need thousands of feet of clearance and a backup plan. It might be better to go underneath the bridge than on top of it. These can be some of the most challenging safety questions that you might run into from a practical perspective. Do I go under the bridge and risk getting kind of low and maybe not hook up with the wave on the other side, or do I try to climb way up and get way over the top? You need to think about thousands of feet of clearance to get safely up over the top of a bridge.
Lynn, before you move on to turbulence, one thing I'd like to add is that the Fern Gap can close remarkably fast.
Yes.
Like astonishingly quickly.
Quickly.
It isn't necessarily just a slow process.
Right, and it's the kind of thing that you need to be monitoring. On that day that I almost died in the Sierras, and I really did, I was at 26,000 feet looking down at this little ribbon of Fohn Gap below me, way above it. The top of the Fohn Gap was 12,000 feet or so, and I'm 14,000 feet above it looking down at this little dinky ribbon. And it took me a long time to descend, and by the time I'm descending, it's closing up. Really, really scary experience. Okay, rotor turbulence is generally roughly proportional to ridgetop wind speed. Surface wind speed is another kind of a surrogate for kind of predicting turbulence. And surface winds greater than 20 knots can make really strong rotors. Less experienced pilots, first timers going out into the waves, should look for days with surface winds less than 15 knots. And the illustration here is that the weaker wave can be super fun. I'll end my presentation with the description of that. Risks include loss of control on tow, extreme sink, and very difficult landing conditions. If you're in this strong sink, you're in a node that's going down, and you must go downwind or upwind to escape the strong sink, not crosswind. If you go crosswind, you're going to remain in that downgoing node. And we had an accident at Morgan years ago that is likely attributed to a pilot going crosswind trying to escape wind wave sink. So just like in any other condition, if the surface winds are really weak and the upper level winds are really strong, there's going to be a shear layer in between there that might be really dramatic. And it's the kind of thing that you should have a heads up and looking for. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Lynn, this is Chris Robert. This is something Rob Eccles and I experienced on our last wave flight in October. SkySight was inaccurate in terms of the primary wave location. It was pretty accurate about the amplitude of the wave, but what we weren't getting was the fact that the wind speed through the day kept increasing. So when we took off, the wind on the ridge was 20 or 30 knots, but when we finally made it back up to Morgan, it had increased to 60. And so the wave had gotten completely flattened. The Fohn Gap had completely closed because of this. And there was no, if you had somehow migrated to the secondary, you weren't going to make it home because of the glide ratio concern.
Yeah, so trying to go upwind.
Yeah, you had to stay upwind. And our plan, Rob and I's plan, was to go all the way down to Nephi. If that had happened at Nephi, it would have effectively eliminated Nephi as a land out option, because there was no way we could have progressed upwind with a 60 knot headwind.
Yeah.
So you have to watch what's happening to the amplitude of the wave as well. And if you have a good wind source, either from your computer or you have data in the cockpit where you can watch wind, it can get excessive.
Yeah.
The sign of that is a flattening of the wave and an increasing of the wavelength between the primary and the secondary and the tertiary waves. So even if you don't have a computer on board, you can watch that happening, and that's a warning sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Really strong winds at the ridgetop level are directly related to some really severe and turbulent conditions, and so it's something to watch. At Morgan, we can directly watch the Mount Ogden winds, which are right close to the airport, and so there's a link. If anybody needs that link, you can email me afterwards, and I can provide you with the link for the Mount Ogden winds. Traffic concerns. So there's a lot of area of heavy airliner traffic in this area, really along the whole ridge. When I wrote this slide, I kind of mistakenly believed that there wasn't as much to the north of us as there was right behind the ridge. And I still think that there's more traffic, that tends to turn right across our ridge and depart off to the east that way, but there's plenty of airliner traffic all the way up and down the ridge. So for that reason, it's really cool to have a transponder-equipped glider, and I think that we do have some club gliders that are transponder-equipped. Even if you're not transponder-equipped, it's the best action is to call up Salt Lake Departure on 135.5 when you're in this area and tell them. And, you know, you kind of feel sheepish sometimes about talking to them. It's way better to talk to them and tell them where the heck you are. You know, they might get a little bit cross with you or something, but who cares? I mean, it's better than eating an airliner, right?
Lynn, let me just add a couple of comments. I have found lately that the folks at Salt Lake are just more than delighted to actually hear from us. They have a heavy traffic load, and just being able to see on their devices that we're there and then communicate to us verbally is nothing more than confidence with them that they can be able to control things. So talk to Salt Lake. They really, really appreciate it. It's worth your effort, and it really takes care of good relationships with them.
Yeah, so years ago, they tended to be cross with us anytime that we went into the area. And I don't know exactly what happened. There was a little bit of an outreach, I think, on both sides. And they make a big effort to try to be nice to us and say thank you and stuff like that. And we try to make a big effort back. And it's been rare. Once in the last 3 or 4 years, I've had a kind of a grumpy controller. But mostly, they are really delighted to talk to us. And it is the right honking thing to do, is what it is.
Lynn, this is Paul. You know, working that for many years, the area that you're looking at is what we always called the departure gate. So it's extended from about a 030 bearing off of Salt Lake to about a 120 bearing, 110 bearing off of Salt Lake. That was the primary departure gate that airliners in a north flow would take off. And even in south flow, they'd wrap around back to that area. So that, like you said, a very, very high intense, especially if you're in the 15 to 18,000 or 17,989. That is a huge area where airliners are going east to the, Minneapolis through the Washington, D.C. type of area. That's where they're taking off.
Yeah, it's a very, very busy area. And
Hey, Lynn.
I had an experience with an airliner years ago that convinced me to get a transponder. My passenger said as the airliner went by that the flight attendant asked him what he wanted. So it was too close for either of us. And so I went and, got a transponder. And I think transponders are really cool. But even if you don't have one, you can tell them where you are and what your altitude is. And, it's a much better solution than just being out there invisible to those guys.
Hey, Lynn, this is Brett Johnson. I fly a lot out of Salt Lake, and what they've been doing, I don't know, the past many years has been once you're climbing out north, once you get above 10,000, they clear you a right-hand turn over the mountains over to your departure point, which is, out east. So basically, they're all turning at about 10,000 to go out east.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had many, many occasions where I'm at 16,000 feet and the controller will ask me if I can maintain 16,000 feet so they can put an airliner underneath me.
So since we have our safety officer and a couple board members on this telecon, I would propose that I think both Twin Steers have transponders, and I think just the Grove 103s or the Twin 2s don't. That, if we're looking to buy equipment, that's what we should put in our airplanes. And even though it's a dirty 4-letter word, I talk to Center a lot. I talk to Approach a lot. ADS-B would not be completely out of line for our sailplanes, just because of where our airfields happen to be. If every airfield was Nephi, and even Nephi has its issues depending on what the flow is, we really ought to consider putting ADS-B in our sailplanes.
And it's something for the board to think about, certainly. And transponders would be the first line of defense. That makes you completely visible to the to Salt Lake Approach and to Salt Lake Center. One other thing that I want to mention here is that I think it's true that many guys who are not professional pilots and are glider pilots have a little bit of stage fright in talking to approach. If you feel uncomfortable doing that, recognize that you're uncomfortable doing that, and either I will or any of the other instructors in the club will be delighted to get with you and do some role playing so that you can be confident calling up approach. And if you spend half an hour or 20 minutes role playing with an instructor, you can be competent so that you won't make a fool of yourself when you're talking to approach for the first time. And I think a lot of what prevents glider pilots from doing it is that they haven't done it and they're a little scared to do it. So that invitation's open for me, and I think probably other instructors. It could even be done remotely or over the phone or like that,
Well, the other thing, Lynn, is atc.com. Just pull up the frequency for Salt Lake Approach or Salt Lake Tower and start listening.
And listening to what they say. Yeah, it's a really good idea too.
The acronyms, everything that's going on.
Yeah, so if anybody would like to role play that with me or with another instructor, you can email me and we can figure out a time to do that, or I can hook you up with somebody who can do that. And 20 minutes or half an hour of role playing, and you can play it out in your mind before you do it for the first time. Call them up. So high altitude issues, whoops, we talked about that one, are the ones that we've talked about before that include hypoxia. And hypoxia is the same issues that you would run into if you're flying thermals at high altitude, but there's other high altitude issues that are pretty specific to wave flight. One is hypothermia. The last 3 or 4 of my passengers every year cannot walk when they get out of the glider because their lower half of their body has gotten so hypothermic that their feet are no longer in contact with them, And this means preparation, dress warmly for high altitudes. You can consider electric socks. Since I've done that, I've actually run up against a product that works super well. It's boot blankets. They make them for duck hunters that sit in duck blinds in the wintertime. And it's just an extra layer of insulation that you zip on over your shoe. It's really easy to get on. They cost about $40 maybe.
Got a pair. Really nice.
They work super well. Did you say they work well for you, Dan?
Oh, absolutely. I recommend them highly.
Yeah, boot blankets are really, really, really good. Another issue is that flutter is a true airspeed phenomenon. And so for that reason, you cannot expect to fly up to the red line, even if it seems like it's really calm and smooth up there. You cannot expect to safely fly up to the marked red line in a glider at high altitude. The pilot operating handbook of the various gliders will often have a high altitude section that limits those speeds. So there's a 2% rule, which means that you can degrade the marked red line by 2% for every 1,000 feet that you go. And so basically you should and could safely degrade the red line by 36% if you are, that's an estimate, flying at 18,000 feet. Now, the time to do this isn't when you're in the cockpit flying the wave and thinking how great life is. The time to do this is to sit on the ground and figure out what your personal speed limit is in the glider that you're going to be flying at 18,000 feet, because we're not going higher than 18,000 feet because of getting into Class A airspace. So figure that out beforehand. I know in my glider it's 98 knots. I'm not going above 98 knots at 18,000 feet. And I think for the Groves, it's in the 90s. You should figure out what that speed limit is before you climb in. So on some of gliders like mine, there's risk of gel coat damage at low temperatures. In my glider, the red line is the yellow line, caution line is minus 15 degrees C. So at minus 15 degrees C, I do not want to take a wing flex. At minus 20 degrees C, it's the red line for the gel coat. And of course, it's not structural damage, but it's really expensive and unsightly cosmetic damage, really expensive, unsightly and cosmetic damage if you happen to hit that. So
Lynn, I've heard rumors also that there are concerns about how quickly the gel coat heats up as you descend from altitude.
Yeah, I've heard that too, that it's better to make a gentle descent rather than a really rapid descent, to allow the gel coat to warm up uniformly across the glider and not have risk of thermal stresses that might be caused by one zone heating up or cooling down faster than another. And then finally, when you're way high and it's late in the day, you think, hey, there's lots of light left. And as you descend, you're in the dark. So you should know when sunset is really going to happen on the ground at your altitude and not exceed that. So you can, pretty easily end up landing in the dark when you were at 18,000 feet and the sun was still up. Okay, now we're going to go into wave technique. I've got about 10 minutes more of prepared stuff, and then we'll be done for tonight, or we can have a short Q&A session. So that's about where we're aiming at. Okay, my first bit of advice is use a GPS or a smartphone or a glide computer that has a clearly visible breadcrumb track, and practice in advance. You can practice, on the ground. You can practice having your significant other drive you around in the car while you look at it so that you can see the breadcrumb trail. I like north up, but that's a personal preference. Other people like track up so they can see it, but you need to be able to see where your breadcrumb trail is. Now, why this is that when you're thousands of feet away from the terrain, you cannot judge where you are upwind or downwind very accurately. And the zone of the wave that might be climbing might be as little as 100 yards wide. It might be a quarter mile wide or maybe as much as a half mile wide, seldom more than that. But trying to hit 100-yard wide thing when your nearest terrain reference is 3,000 or 4,000 feet below you is practically impossible. So I extensively use a moving map display with a visible breadcrumb trail so I can tell where the heck I am. Toe to the wave, which is a preferred, or climb in the ascending rotor. Both techniques can be done. Climbing in the ascending rotor is harder just simply because you get shaken around a bunch. That means just in the area of the rotor, on the windward side of the rotor that is going up. And the problem is that it's kind of going up on an average, but it's going up and down. So it's quite difficult to climb the ascending rotor. It can totally be done. Make all your turns into the wind. If you get up into one of these areas where you're looking at a 40-knot west wind or a 50-knot west wind, and you circle, on the downwind side of that circle, you'll get blown into Wyoming before you get, turned back around again. So make all your turns into the wind as if you were soaring the ridge. So bow ties, not circles. So when you find the first location of smooth lift, even if it's just 1 or 2 knots, mark it with a bow tie turn so you can see it on your GPS. You'll see that breadcrumb, that bow-tied breadcrumb on your GPS. And then you start making north and south lines away from that area, pushing the endpoints of the successive north-south lines and returning to the location of the best lift whenever you find any weakness. And you do these over and over again, starting at any place where you can get, say, 1 knot. Starting at any place where you can get 1 knot, pushing the endpoints farther until you can get a map of where the wave is best. continually just going back to the location of best lift when you encounter weakness. If the wave is good, righteous, real wave, it'll stay pretty much in the same location over the ground as you do this. Sometimes the wave is not so well behaved, but often it is. And you just try to move successive passes slightly east or west, trying to find the best lift. That's how you get started in the wave. Questions? Okay, the wave alignment will be roughly parallel to the generating ridge, no matter which direction the wind is. You can sort of think about how that would look in your mind if the wind is not exactly parallel to the ridge. The wave will mirror the ridge, and so it'll be roughly parallel to the generating ridge, no matter which way the wind is coming from. However, the wave floor and the distance from the ridge will vary widely depending on the thermal profile and wind speed, and predicting it is one of the more difficult aspects of hooking the wave. You are not sure how high you need to go or how far away from the ridge you need to go, and it's more typically a matter of trial and error, going up and feeling it around. Stronger wind makes longer wavelengths, and that is true. So that could mean that the wave is farther back, but it depends on the thermal profile as well, so it's not completely a reliable thing. You need to anticipate a gap downwind of every canyon and plan to lose 2,000 feet or more crossing the larger gaps. You can try to move from the secondary wave up to the primary for better climb rates, but it's going to cost you a couple of thousand feet at least to do that. And it doesn't always work because sometimes the secondary is stronger. Okay, just finishing up today, geography specifics. In the Morgan area, Mount Ogden works great, especially with the directly west or slightly north wind. Thurston Peak and Francis Peak on the South Ridge work great. As a matter of fact, they are just the sweetest places on the ridge, bar none, north-south, anywhere. It's the most reliable place to be is downwind of Thurston Peak or Francis Peak on the South Ridge. It's where we tow to in Morgan. This works especially well if the wind is slightly south. It's the best place to be, period. There's a big gap as you go south from Parley's Canyon all the way down to the Deer Valley area. There's often good wave in the Deer Valley area, but there's a big gap from Parley's Canyon down into that area on most days. Not on every day, but on most days. Timpanogos works great. Going the other direction, Ben Lomond often works really well, but the area of lift around Ben Lomond is quite often fairly small. So when we're trying to go north from Morgan, we climb behind either Thurston Peak or Francis Peak and then move up to Mount Ogden and then glide up to Ben Lomond. And I try to map the wave there at Ben Lomond so when I return to it, I can find it again because the best area of lift behind Ben Lomond is often pretty little.
Hey, Lynn.
Yeah.
This is Paul. Back to the Timpanogos area, if you push further south to the Seven Peaks, BYU Mountain, Provo Peak area, that usually works a little better than Timpanogos. I've found it gets down into the Walsburg Canyon. So if you want to add that to your slide,
sure.
All the way down through that area and all the way down to Nephi, like Mr. Mindy has pointed out, he made a great point.
Yep. Yeah, the key though is you may have to change your heading by 40 degrees to stay in it after you leave Timpanogos, especially if it's a clear wave day.
Yes, true.
You go from pure southbound to southwest, and if you make the mistake of dumping out the back side of it, you're kind of hosed, especially if it's in excess of 40 or 50 knots.
Yeah, true.
Okay, going north again. It can be a little bit tricky to jump from Ben Lomond to the Wellsvilles over the Sardine Canyon Gap, just because there's I don't know, it's a number like 6 miles or 7 miles that often doesn't work. The Wellsvilles work just crackerjack. The Wellsvilles are wonderful, but they're generally at a different distance back from the ridge as compared to everything from Ben Lomond and farther south. So as you go up to the Wellsvilles, you generally, from Morgan, you have to recalibrate your distance back from the ridge in order to find the sweet spot of the wave. Conversely, if you're going south from Logan area and you've been climbing behind the Wellsvilles, it requires recalibration from the distance, generally closer to the ridge, to find it at Ben Lomond and south from there. The jump from the Wellsvilles to Gunsight Peak is one of the trickiest ones, just because it's so far, and it's difficult for me sometimes to do it. However, there are really odd days, and they're not completely rare, when there's wave all the way across there, and where it has no right to be. Out there over the flat where the Bear River area is there, and there's no wave upwind of you, there's often, sometimes at least, wave there. And my belief is that it is like the fifth bounce back or something like that from the promontory ridges up to the front. I'm not sure that that's what it is, but there's wave there. Tim, are you still on with this?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Have you encountered that?
Yeah, it works there. And then actually, if you get up near north near Malad, the wave then actually works all the way up to Pocatello on those two ridges north even. I've flown the wave up there. So it's that jump from the Wellsvilles to the next ones north and getting connected is usually the hardest thing.
Yeah. The area around Gunsight Peak looks like it ought to work crackerjack, and it often does, but the best area there at Gunsight Peak is often, again, pretty small. And if you can move north from there toward up toward Malad and Downey in that area that are on the other side of the ridge, actually, but in that area, it can often work well there. So it's definitely trickier to go north from the Wellsvilles. A beginning wave pilot towing out of Logan should probably go to the Wellsvilles first. Is that right?
Yeah, we tow just right behind the Wellsvilles. The town of Minden, right behind the Wellsvilles, is almost a perfect spot to drop right there.
Yeah, and learn to fly the wave there, and probably south is an easier cross-country direction from north initially, but it's not that unusual that the wave will work all the way across the gap. It's tricky. So what I do is I very gingerly work my way out across that gap, and if it's not going to work, I run home to the Wellsvilles like a scared child. But sometimes, 1 in 4 or 5 times, I'll be able to just continue in good wave all the way up to Gunsight Peak and farther north.
So if you look at the topography from the ridges to the west of Gunsight Peak, if you fly it a few times, you get a feel for what the wavelength of the wave is. And there's 2 waves that fit between, so it's not the 5th wave, it's probably the secondary wave off of the range to the west of Gunsight, which is about 20 miles to the west. And then usually the secondary from the Wellsvilles is right over the top or just east of Logan. And it's, again, amplified by the ridge to the east of Logan.
Yeah, it can work the other way, too, where the phases are wrong and it's destructive interference. Absolutely. And it's complete trash, So there's a kind of a really weak wave day. That distance that we're talking about is about a mile from north to south, and I'm just going around it and sinking around, but climbing some on that super weak wave day. And it's kind of like one of those days where you can stay up for an hour and it's sort of fun, but it can also be very frustrating. Here's a better one where I am flying, here is Morgan Airport, and this is down south into the Morgan Valley, and I'm doing great up and down. And Weber Canyon's, right about here. Right about here. And so I couldn't find too much going farther north of that. And then good days, there I am up flying past Malad on the north and south, south of Park City on the south. And my better performances have been 600 OLC kilometers at average speeds of 150 kilometers per hour. So I'm sure if you were aggressive, you could probably do better than that. But 150 kilometer per hour, 600 kilometer days are, you know, they get done several times per year. Okay. Any questions? I'll tell a quick story and then we can finish. Dave Cleveland, I don't know, are you in a position to show anything on SkySight really quickly or not?
No, I don't think so. The link that I sent to Art was a RASP of the Sierra Nevada area.
I see.
And I can send you the link.
Hey, Rob.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Lynn. I can probably do it.
Okay. See if you can pull something up on SkySight, Art. Even if it's not showing great wave, you could just at least show what the predictors are. So where I'll end up with on my presentation here tonight is just telling the story. You know, I think that myself and one or two other pilots really pioneered consistent wave flying in the Morgan area. You know, prior to that, there'd certainly been a bunch of wave flights, and there'd been some down at Heber, and there had been the state record altitude flight that was clear back in the 1960s or 70s that happened down there. But nobody was going out and doing it every fall, week in and week out, week in and week out. So I decided that I really wanted to do that and to figure out where to tow, how to instruct students, you know, all that stuff that comes along with doing it regularly. And now we're making dozens of wave flights every season, you know, maybe a number like 40 or 50 wave flights every season out of Morgan, which, you know, 20 years ago, that was unheard of, really. You'd do one. And so the first day, there was nobody to really tell me how to do it or anything. And so I got all my predictive tools out, and I picked this day that was really super strong. And one of the morals to the story is pick a day that's not super strong. Because weak wave is great. Weak wave is totally great. And I strapped my wife, Heidi, in the front seat, and we hooked up behind Wayne Wilkinson, and off we went, towing behind old Ogden. And we towed up there behind Mount Ogden, and the turbulence was extreme as we towed into the rotor there. I was just wall to wall trying to keep the shining side up, you know, going to full control aileron excursions to both sides and using a bunch of rudder and everything, trying to just hold the glider up. And all of a sudden, Wayne up in front of me, he swings left, and he swings right, and he swings left, and he swings right, and then he just goes up and completely inverted. And I am looking at the wheels of the tow plane, and Wayne is upside down in front of me on tow. And I grabbed the tow release and pulled. Heidi was grabbing for the release too as we went, and we released and went right over the top of him, and he split-assed underneath us and flew away. And the glider was being shaken so hard at this point that I couldn't really read any of the instruments very accurately. You know, I had old steam gauges in it, and the Vario's kind of being shaken around, and the altimeter's being shaken around, and I'm just, and at this point, Heidi starts to sob, and she says, "You've killed us, and our kids are going to be orphans." And she's saying stuff like that, you know. And I went around in a little kind of a half of a bow tie, and the one instrument I could read was my SN10, and it says, "Hey, you just gained 100 feet," you know, because it's digital. And I said, well, maybe, you know, I'll just try again. And Heidi is now shrieking at this point, and we go around another half turn, and definitely we climbed a little bit, and maybe it wasn't quite as turbulent as a minute ago. And we do 2 or 3 of these, and on the 4th one, we break into this smooth, steady, constant wave, 6 knots, and the Vario's going cheep, 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 and we're just dead, you know, in this dead calm stuff. And I hear Heidi up there just going, ah, 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 ah. So that is the story of the pioneering flight at Morgan. I got back down on the ground, and, you know, what Wayne is a kind of a guy who just doesn't scare worth a darn, you know. And I get down on the ground and I said, "What did you think of that?" He says, "That dadgum thing flipped me over." That was his response. "That dadgum thing flipped me right over."
Can you guys see my screen?
I don't know. Can anyone else see him?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is SkySight, and this is for Friday. This is the Reno Tahoe area. And when I'm looking for wave, usually the first thing I do is actually look for ridge lift, or I look at the surface winds. And what I'm looking for are really strong surface winds right on the ridge. And so this is that ridge line just west of the Minden Airport, and it goes all the way up to Reno. So that's usually the first thing I look at is, if there's really strong winds that are approximately perpendicular to the ridge line, that's a good reason to maybe look to see if there's wave. If there isn't this, if there's no good ridge lift and it's not super perpendicular, I don't typically look for wave. But then with SkySight, you can go and look at the vertical velocity at different altitude cross sections. This is usually you want it to be strong, kind of low, so you can tow into it with a reasonably priced tow. I'm not
3 kilometers is close to ridgetop.
Yeah, so this is actually this would be pretty good for this would be a 5,000 foot tow or a 4,000 or so, and you can see it's about predicted to be 6 or 7 knots on Friday. This is the wave strength. So yeah, great day. Thanks for pointing this out, Dave Cleveland. Great day. Anyone want to go to Reno?
Hey, Art, did you want to see an example for Utah? 7 February was pretty good, as well as 6 February.
Yeah, we have had some good days, haven't we? Here we go.
Oh yeah, that's what they look like.
So we're looking at so there's Morgan, and this is at right around 2:00, and this is this is at ridgetop height, and it's expected to be 2 knots up. Did you say what other date did you say, Rob?
I think 7 February was the best Sunday.
There we go, much better. Yep.
So this was pretty much the day that Rob and I flew down to Nebo.
Looked a lot like this.
Yeah, it looked almost exactly like this. You cannot go direct. So when you got 10 miles south of Morgan, you had to do the gut check and go pretty far to the east to stay in it.
Yeah, that's the one I mentioned, that you have to cross that gap from Parley's Canyon down toward the Deer Valley area and go east while you're doing it.
Art, can you bump it up to 13,000, please? It's going to be better at 13, but there are still big holes where you have to do some significant maneuvering to stay on the front of it.
Yeah.
That really illustrates that gap super well.
Yeah. It certainly helps if it's marked. That helps make that jumping the gap tolerable.
Art, can you just pull up north toward the Cache Valley on that day and see what it looked like there?
Pretty good.
And so you can sort of see the areas near Ben Lomond, where that's probably right about there, and then north up toward the Wellsvilles, which is that elongated section. These are the areas that we talked about. And then maybe the long gap before you get to Gunsight Peak, and it might work and it might not. These are just exactly what we talked about.
Yep.
And you can see from Howell to the west right now on this particular day, it was a magnifying day. So you had the primary coming off of the range to the west, which got pumped up pretty well to the northwest of the Wellsvilles and worked well. The tertiary off of that worked well across the gap, and then the ridge east of Logan pumped it up even more.
Now, this also shows a really dramatic wave on the backside of the Cache Valley Ridge. I've never done it, I've never had the courage to try to get there. I mean, I think if you're towing out of Evanston, it might be something that's doable. The trouble is that if you try to go that direction and it doesn't work, you're in such a world of hurt in trying to get back to anything, because you got to remember that it's practically impossible to go upwind in these circumstances.
Art, can you zoom out to get a much bigger look at this? You have a 1,000-kilometer day right there, but it is risky, just like Lynn said.
Yeah, getting across the gap, down around Park City is the biggest gap that you can see. But you can see how you might be able to do it, and then come west, south of Heber, and go all the way to Nephi and beyond.
Yep, a great day. Dan Thurkel, were you in this wave at this time?
I was the day before, and we'll talk about that next week.
Very good. All right, well, now might be a good time to wrap up, unless there's any other questions. Awesome. So just a little bit of bookkeeping. Our next seminar is going to be Dan Thurkel, who just spoke up, and he's going to be doing a seminar on safe soaring around the Morgan area. So, Lynn, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very good, like usual, and I hope everybody else has a great rest of their week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks,
Lynn.
Thank you.
Really good.